How's it going, guys? I am Folkerman, your local brick build historian. Today we are taking a look at Brickmania's Supermarine Spitfire Mark 1 with another episode of Brick Build History. The Spitfire is probably the most famous British fighter. It's served in many different theaters, from Battle of Britain to Northern Africa to Western Europe, Southern Europe, or like the Mediterranean, and going into the Pacific. So it's fought everything from uh, Italian uh, Italian planes, German, Japanese, the whole lot. Uh, and Brickmania's built a kit of it. This is the Battle of Britain version, so it goes very well with the Hawker Hurricane and the Bf-109E and the Junkers Ju-88. But without further ado, let's do a kit review and then history. So just like everything else, I'm going to start with the box. So you have Spitfire Mark 1, 470 Lego elements, and one custom minifigure designed by Cody Ocell. On the manufacturing plate, same information, Brickmania Kit 2276, skill level 4 out of 5, and same information there. A monochromatic image in the back, a side view from the right hand side, and I have number 155. They did really fancy work here with this writing for some reason, but either way, let's take a look at the kit. So from the get-go, this wing section is just really good. The Spitfire is really well known for its elliptical wing, which is virtually impossible to get with a blocky brick. So the fact that he was able to get this as close as possible to a elliptical wing is quite amazing. Like, just wide and then boop all the way down. You got the triple exhaust stack, or where the two pistons are doubled up into one exhaust. Very typical of an early British fighter engine. They eventually would go to single stacked exhausts like every other country, because they realized that the dual exhaust is useless. You have the narrow landing gear down here with the oil coolers and radiators on the bottom. You can see how he made this section like separate, and it clips into the midsection there. And then you have the big roundel on the side here. You have the roundels on the top and the bottom, and then you of course have the red, white, and blue on the tail. The typical razorback of early fighters of the day. Frying pan on the back, of course. And then you have the stickers for the machine guns, where the British would tape it so that they could tell like which ones fired and which ones didn't. So, and they made it very easy for you because it is just one continuous sticker instead of having 4 small stickers to apply, which would be a pain. Also, the very unique use of the goggles on the windshield, because the forward windshield of the Spitfire is pretty round, so that was a very unique use of the goggles. Unfortunately, they don't have the little door that flips down for the pilot to get in, but you know, oh well. So it's overall a very nice, like, stout kit. You can pick it up by the wing, of course. The landing gear does retract in. Kind of have to finagle it to fit into its hole, but it works. And now, on to the history. So the Supermarine Spitfire was a basically built to be an interceptor, while the Hawker Hurricane is more of like a longer range fighter. The Spitfire was made to be a short range interceptor, which is perfect for the Battle of Britain, coincidentally enough. It was designed, or started being designed, by a guy named R.J. Mitchell, and he was part of the Supermarine company, which was part of Vickers Armstrong, like the aviation side of Vickers Armstrong, and he would start development of this in the 1930s. Saw that the Hawker Hurricane was accepted, and immediately knew he needed to get a all metal monoplane for Britain to go along with the Hawker Hurricane, because the Hawker Hurricane broke the British ministry's back on saying that they were only going to accept biplanes. But whenever the Hawker Hurricane was accepted, then it was like, okay, well, now we've opened it up to a bunch of monoplanes, which ultimately was best for them. So in the 1930s, he started designing this, and it would be introduced in 1938 into the RAF. By 1939, there was a few squadrons in here, but a majority of the squadrons in the RAF were Hawker Hurricanes. So by the time the Battle of Britain happened, the Spitfire, in the beginning of the Battle of Britain, the Spitfire really wasn't around too much. There's a few squadrons here and there, but a majority of the fighting was done by Hawker Hurricanes. So even though nowadays we think Spitfire, whenever it comes to the Battle of Britain and, fighting against the ME-109s, the majority of it was Hawker Hurricanes. But either way, in 1939, though, one Spitfire cost 12,604 pounds, which is 3 times the amount of a Hawker Hurricane. The reason for that being is that the Spitfire was all metal, while the Hawker Hurricane had the wood and the linen as a majority of the fuselage, except for the nose. The Spitfire was all metal, so it cost a lot more than the Hawker Hurricane. One of the big design features of the Spitfire that I mentioned before is the elliptical wing. Basically, having no straight surface going down to the wingtips, it caused this weird effect where with the cross section there's less drag. So having less drag means you can go faster. So this thing was built to be faster than basically any other aircraft. Whether that was really achieved, not really. It was faster than Hurricane. That could be said, but after a while, like against like the P-51 and all that, and it just couldn't compete. But the elliptical wing is a very interesting piece of the Spitfire, especially the fact that it's very difficult to manufacture. You have to get it perfectly right every time. So if you mess it up a little bit, it's not going to be as effective, which is one of the downsides of the Spitfire compared to the Hurricane. The Hurricane had low labor intense, like wasn't as labor intensive. There's like looser restrictions on what could be built and how you could build it, while the Spitfire, like the wings alone, had to be specifically built. So in 1937, 1 year after the initial flight of the Spitfire, R.J. Mitchell would die, unfortunately, and it would be taken over by his colleague Joseph Smith, who would from then on go from the Mark 1 all the way out to I think it's like the Mark 15. Like there's so many variants of the Spitfire, it is ridiculous. So the Spitfire, as I said, would go to basically every front, almost every front except for like the Eastern Front, where, well, I mean, it did go to the Eastern Front, but the Soviets did not like the Spitfire whatsoever. But the British pilots liked it, and the American pilots who came over into the Eagle Squadron, which was never made with American officers. Pearl Harbor messed that up, and they had an American officer in the movie go to the Eagle Squadron, but that wasn't true because American officers were not allowed to join the Eagle Squadron. It was volunteer pilots who were civilians who went over to England to fly in against the Germans. But they did enjoy the Spitfire. So, you know, there's always a who liked it more, like kind of like how the Soviets, they liked the P-39. The Americans did not. So, you know, it's all about as much of who likes it as who doesn't like it. So, but there was one major problem whenever it came to the early Spitfires, and that was whenever it would go inverted. When it would go inverted, the carburetor would choke out the engine, which is bad. You could clearly see it in the movie Battle of Britain, whenever a Spitfire does a barrel roll, and you can just hear the engine like cut off. The reason for that being is that it has a floater type carburetor, so that whenever it goes inverted, the float would go up and fuel would just pour into the engine, flooding the engine and cutting it off for a little bit until you go back into a normal state. This wasn't, and it also happened in high G maneuvers. So the Germans actually took advantage of this, and they knew that they could hit a higher G than the Spitfire could just because of its carburetor. So there's actually a woman, I forgot what her name is, I should have written it down, who came up with a fix. There's basically a brass ring floater to help prevent the carburetor from flooding the engine whenever it goes inverted. And if you want to know why the Germans didn't have this problem, was because they had direct fuel injection. Speaking of the engine, so the early Spitfires, like the Mark I here, would have a Rolls-Royce Merlin Mark II 1030 horsepower V12, same as the Hurricane. Later on, they would have like this, I think it's a 1200 horsepower engine, and then eventually all the way to the later versions, like the Mark IX, would have the Rolls-Royce Griffin 2340 horsepower V12. So, always had a V12 liquid cooled engine in the front here. Also had a fuel tank right up there, which is very fun if that catches on fire. Really, there's not a lot more. Top speed was around 370 miles per hour, and had a very short range of like roughly like 480 miles. Also, the Mark I here has 8 303 Browning machine guns, same as the Hurricane, although the machine guns are separated farther than being close together like the Hurricane's was. And the armament would change throughout the different models, adding 20 millimeter cannons and 50 caliber guns and so on and so forth. There's so many variations that I could just go on for days. The Spitfire is actually one of the most preserved aircraft in the world right now. It served for many countries, and it's basically like the P-51 of the American, or like the British version of the P-51 when it comes to preserved aircraft. Because the amount of preserved P-51s out there, there's a lot. The amount of preserved Spitfires is also a lot. And like, it's just airworthy versions, static versions, doesn't matter. There's a lot of Spitfires out there. I guess that's what one of the benefits of being a winner. So the Spitfire, even though some say it's overrated, some say it's the greatest thing Britain has ever designed, no matter what you think of it, it is still cool, especially whenever you have it in Lego form. So that's really about it. I could go on days and days and days about the Spitfire. It's just one of those planes. There's just so much to it, too much in fact. So hopefully you liked the video, so hit a like if you did. If you want to see more of this, I have over 100 different kits, so I got a lot to do. And if you want to see a certain kit, go ahead and comment what you want to see. I'm pretty open to it because I just want to share history. So if you want to see something in specific, go ahead and tell me. With that said, I am Folkerman, and let's continue to build history.